Welcome back, everyone. Today we need to have a tough but important conversation about two very different stories. Stories that reflect the divisions running through America right now. On one hand, we have the tragic death of a Delta State University student in Mississippi, reportedly found hanging, an incident that raises painful questions about race, justice, and safety. On the other hand, we have conservative commentator Charlie Kirk facing heated backlash at events, sometimes even being silenced or shouted down for his political views. Two very different experiences, yet both tell us something about where America is today. A nation split, suspicious, and struggling to understand itself. Let's begin with the Mississippi case. A young black student at Delta State University was found hanging. Immediately, this evokes a long, haunting history in the South. For black families, for black communities, the sight of a hanging is not just tragic, it carries the unbearable weight of lynching, of racial terror that defined generations of American history. Even if investigators determine this was a suicide, the symbolism is impossible to ignore. For many, it brings up a sense of fear and distrust. Was justice truly served? Was the truth revealed? These questions don't just linger in the air, they open up old wounds that never fully healed. This story highlights the ongoing pain of racial trauma in America. It also exposes the gap in lived experiences. For some, it is a heartbreaking story of loss. For others, it may not even make headlines. And that difference in perception is part of the division we face. Now let's turn to Charlie Kirk. Recently, Kirk has faced protests and aggressive pushback at his speaking events. Some students argue that his views are harmful or even dangerous. Others believe he's simply exercising free speech. Regardless of where you stand politically, what we see is another example of America tearing itself apart. Not necessarily through violence, but through the erosion of dialogue. People are no longer willing to listen, to disagree respectfully, or to live alongside different opinions. This is a different kind of pain from what happened at Delta State, but it still reflects a fractured society. Instead of healing, we're hardening. Instead of conversations, we're choosing confrontation. So how do these two stories connect? On the surface, they don't. One is about a tragic death tied to America's racial history. The other is about political speech and backlash. But both are symptoms of a divided America. In Mississippi, a young black student's death raises questions of justice and trust, divisions that go back centuries. In Charlie Kirk's case, the hostility he faces highlights how unwilling Americans have become to even tolerate disagreement. Both situations reveal the same truth. People don't trust each other anymore. Communities don't feel heard. Voices feel silenced, whether by injustice or by social pressure. And when trust disappears, division grows. So what's the way forward? The solution is not simple, but it starts with empathy. We cannot ignore pain because it doesn't touch us directly. We cannot dismiss voices simply because we disagree with them. First, when tragedies like the Delta State student's death happen, we must demand transparency and accountability. Not just for the sake of truth, but to restore trust. Communities must see that justice is pursued honestly. Second, when it comes to speech and political differences, we must relearn the art of dialogue. Silencing people we disagree with only deepens the divide. Listening doesn't mean agreeing, but it does mean respecting the humanity of the person across from you. And finally, we need to acknowledge that division isn't someone else's fault. It's all of ours. Healing starts not in Washington, not in the media, but in our homes, on our campuses, and in our communities. America is divided. These two stories prove it. One reflects centuries of racial trauma, the other shows our inability to handle differences in opinion. Both reveal fractures that cannot be ignored. But here's the hope. Division isn't permanent. History shows us that nations can heal, but only if we choose to. Only if we recognize pain, demand justice, defend free speech, and above all, see each other as human first. Because if we don't, then America doesn't just stay divided. It falls apart, and none of us can afford that. Thank you for listening.